Everyone has their place in Canadian history, but those of us alive today rely on the history of our forefathers to provide us with a story to tell. I am Travis, and my place in Canadian history started around the 1890s when my great-great-grandfather Louis Redenbach I moved at a very young age from Russia with his family to Saskatchewan. Although he was of German origin, he lived on the border of Russia and Germany, better known as Prussia. The Canadian government at the time was conducting a huge campaign of publications and lectures promoting Canadian immigration. Thousands of German immigrants entered both the 2-week-long sea voyage and the long land caravan to gain the valuable land plots the Canadian government had advertised and promised. The Redenbach family settled along with many other German, Polish, Ukrainian immigrants in the Melville-Yorkton area, and prospered as farmers and formed compact German-speaking communities built around their Catholic and Lutheran churches and continued Old World customs. In 1913, my great-great-grandfather got married and had their first son, Louis Redenbach II, in Melville, Saskatchewan, and within the next 5 years had 2 daughters, bringing their family to 5. But in 1918, the Spanish flu, which killed 50,000 Canadians, also took the life of my great-great-grandmother. Finding it extremely difficult to bring up 3 children on his own, my great-great-grandfather married again to a lady who had also lost her husband to the flu and was trying to bring up 5 children. Together they had another 8 children, so in total the Redenbach family consisted of 18 members. At the age of 12, with a grade 6 education, my great-grandfather Louis Redenbach II had to quit school to go to work on the farm in order to help support the family. At the time, he was actively involved in the town's baseball league, and had he been able to pursue baseball, his career might have been very different. He worked the farm until he married my great-grandmother Ella in 1938. At that time, he had already started to transition from farm work to that of a blacksmith. My grandmother Luella, the eldest of 3 Redenbach girls, and named after both of her parents, was born in Melville in 1939. She lived there until Grenfell required a blacksmith, so my great-grandpa Louis moved his family and the house to where he could continue to learn his new trade. When World War II started, the Canadian government did not recruit my great-grandfather to war. They stated that he was needed by the farmers to continue to keep their farms working, and so my great-grandfather stayed home. In 1955, my great-grandfather bought the blacksmith shop, and for the next 25 years grew and expanded his business, bringing blacksmithing into a new era, from not just shoeing horses, but into fixing and fabricating farm equipment. His customers came from all over Saskatchewan, and his snowplows and grain hoppers were well known. The Redenbach family stayed in Grenfell and became very well-respected members of the community, bringing up 3 girls. My great-grandmother was heavily involved in the Lutheran Church, and my grandmother, the eldest of 3 girls, graduated from high school and continued her education in Regina to become a registered nurse, the first of the family to gain post-secondary education. Growing up across the street was the McLean family, where my great-great-grandfather, Dan McLean I, worked in refrigeration. He married Margaret from Regina, and together had 3 children, their second being a son named Danny. In 1961, Luella Redenbach married Danny McLean in the biggest wedding seen to date in Grenfell, Saskatchewan, and they moved east to Toronto to start a new life together. My grandfather wanting to complete his electronics degree at U of T, and my grandmother supporting him as a nurse at Toronto General Hospital. In 1964, my grandparents started their family with a daughter, naming her Paula, who would later become my mother. They moved many times, first to Boston, then to Ottawa, where my grandfather worked for Nortel, but finally settled north of Toronto in Tottenham, and my grandfather commuted daily to Toronto to work in the IT industry. My grandmother retired from nursing to be a stay-at-home mom and brought up my mother and my Uncle Dan. In 1978, my great-grandfather finally retired, and together with my great-grandmother, they traveled each year out to BC and then to Ontario in a motorhome that he had built. In 1981, my mother met my father, Jim Dermott. The Dermott family had lived their whole lives in Tottenham and Alliston, Ontario area. They were Irish immigrants who endured the potato famine of the mid-1800s and who immigrated to Canada as hardworking but poorly educated and starving families desperately looking for work. My father's parents, Nana Ruth and Papa Harold, owned and operated the Dermott Pro hardware store in Tottenham for 25 years. In 1987, after graduating from the University of Guelph and York University, my parents got married and moved to Kingston, Ontario so that my mother could continue her education at Queen's University in physical therapy. In In 1988, my great-grandparents celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, and the whole family, now 22 of them, traveled back to Grenfell for the celebration. I was born in December 1996 in Newmarket, Ontario, after my sister, Galandra, who was born in 1994. We too have moved a few times because of my father's work as a business salesman for Pitney Bowes, but have returned to the Newmarket area. Both of my parents were actively involved in sports as children, my father in hockey, my mother in figure skating, so it was no surprise that I had keen interest in sport, my first love that of hockey, and I started to show that desire very early on. I have continued to love the sport of hockey, have played reps since the age of 7, and my aspirations are to complete a university degree in business in the United States while playing NCAA. My history comes from many areas, Germany, Russia, and Ireland, where my forefathers worked extremely hard as farmers, blacksmiths, and laborers to allow me to prosper and hopefully make them proud as a Canadian professional athlete.